Silas Cole knew the language of the plains, written in snow and wind. Every track told a story: a coyote on the hunt, a deer seeking shelter. But this story made no sense. A single set of footprints, small and stumbling, heading away from the safety of the trail. Beside them, a long, heavy groove was being carved into the snow, a line of pure, desperate effort. Whoever was at the other end of that line was not a survivor. They were a ghost in the making, and the storm was just beginning to howl its welcome. January in the Wyoming Territory wasn't merely winter. It was a punishment. A relentless wind roared over the open plains, driving sharp needles of snow horizontally. Eleanor Vance felt the leather reins become useless in her hands. Her woolen gloves were no match for the biting cold that had crept deep into her joints. Her wagon had broken an axle a dozen miles back. At first, she had tried to walk, pulling the trunk that held her entire life behind her. But now her boots were soaked, and her feet were losing feeling. Death had not been on her itinerary for the day, but it was fast becoming the likely outcome. She could only pray that somewhere ahead lay a roof, a shelter. Through the furiously dancing curtain of white, a dark shape began to resolve. Eleanor blinked, her heart giving a painful throb in her chest. A horse, then a rider. He was hunched low against the storm. She stumbled, then collapsed to her knees in the snow. The rider reined his mount indecisively. "Ma'am," his voice was a calm baritone, carrying no alarm, only an uncanny stillness. He swung down from his horse, snow bursting around his boots. He knelt before her, his eyes assessing her condition more accurately than any question could. Eleanor tried to speak, but her lips only trembled. She was too close to collapse, and they both knew it. He said nothing more. His thick leather coat was caked with snow on the shoulders. He stood, and with a startling, easy strength, he lifted her as if she were a child. The warmth from his chest, even through his coat, was the most welcome thing she had ever felt. "I won't leave you out here," he said, his voice a commitment. "My name is Silas Cole." "Eleanor," she could only whisper in return. He wrapped a thick, dry wool blanket around her. It sent a mix of wood smoke and leather. Then he gently set her on his saddle before mounting behind her, his arms securing her against his chest. They moved in silence. The world around them was a blurred white, but Silas's horse walked with a steady gait, and he seemed to know exactly where he was going. Eleanor leaned against him, drawing what little life she had left from the warmth radiating from him, her eyes closed. His arm around her waist was a firm, protective bulwark against nature's fury. When they arrived, darkness had begun to fall. It was a small, sturdy log cabin, a fortress in the wilderness. He lifted her down again, carrying her over the threshold. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. A fire blazed in the stone hearth. He gently set her down in a chair nearby, then knelt beside her to undo her scarf and sodden gloves. His hands were steady but gentle as he carefully unlaced and pulled off her boots. Eleanor didn't dare to look, but she could feel his heavy silence. "You've walked too long," he said, his voice edged with genuine concern. "You should have found cover and waited." "I had no choice," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The wagon broke. He stood, moving with an economy of motion. He took a basin from a shelf, poured warm water into it from a large kettle near the hearth, and set it on the hearth floor. "We'll have to bring the warmth back by degrees," he explained, his tone as even as a well-recited lesson. "Too much, too soon will do more harm than good." He gently lifted each of her feet into the basin. Eleanor winced as feeling painful, but promising, began to return. She watched him. He stoked the fire, added more logs, then fetched tea from a tin canister. Everything he did spoke of a quiet competence, of a man accustomed to surviving storms, helping strangers, and keeping calm when others might have panicked. A while later, after he had handed her a mug of hot tea, He finally asked, "Why were you out there alone?" She looked down at the steam rising from the tin mug. "My destination is Sheridan. I've been offered a position as the schoolmistress there." "Alone?" he asked, but it wasn't a judgment. She hesitated. "Yes." He didn't seem surprised, just nodded. Once and sat in the chair opposite her. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the wind against the windows. "I lost the school in Kansas," she said at last. "The town. It just withered. Families moved on. There were no more pupils to teach. I had nothing left there." He studied her eyes, his expression thoughtful. "Not many women would make a journey like that on their own." "Not many women have much of a choice," she replied. He nodded again, as if he understood more than she had said. That night, Silas offered her the only bed. Though she protested, he simply said, "You need the rest more than I do. I'm accustomed to rougher arrangements." The next morning, the wind had died down. A thick, pristine blanket of snow covered everything outside, but the worst had passed. He offered her breakfast of eggs, bacon, and toasted bread. She ate slowly, her body still sore but warmer than it had been in days. "I can guide you to Sheridan once the trail is clearer," he said. "Might be 2 days." She looked up at him. "You don't have to. I owe you too much already." "There is no debt between us." He paused. "You were in need." "That is reason enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Since she was a girl, no one had helped her without expecting something in return. Silas's face was open, not soft but honest. He meant it. They spent the day waiting, tending to the horse, chopping more wood, and mending some gear. Eleanor found her gaze following him, the purpose in his movements, the way he never raised his voice, the way he listened when she spoke. That night, as snow began to fall again, soft and light, she stood by the window in his coat, watching the trees sway. Silas came to stand beside her. "Cold?" She shook her head. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how you came through that storm as if you were made for it." He looked down at her. "I was just on my way back from checking my fence line." She smiled faintly. "Still, you found me." He said nothing, just looked at her a moment longer. Then he gently reached out, catching a stray wisp of hair with his thumb and forefinger and tucking it behind her ear. His fingers were warm. For a long moment, they stood there side by side, watching the snowfall. A strange reluctance settled in her chest. She did not want to leave, a feeling she could not name but knew was profound. The sky was clear and the air was cold, but still. Silas had packed the supplies. Eleanor stood outside, her trunk tied securely to the second horse. "I can ride on my own," she said, not wanting to be a burden any longer. Silas met her eyes. "I don't doubt it, but the trail is still slick." He said no more, but she understood. Another fall could leave her unable to get back up. He came closer, and she didn't object as he lifted her with his strong, careful hands onto his own saddle dot as they set off. She once again leaned against his solid back. The steady rhythm of his breathing was a quiet reassurance to her own anxious heart. This feeling was strange. It was not a fever, but a deep trust, a recognition that this man's silent devotion was worth more than all the promises she had ever heard. Sheridan appeared in the distance, smoke rising from its chimneys like welcoming fingers. As they entered the town, the sounds of life, a barking dog, the wheels of a wagon on the main street, the murmur of voices washed over her. This place, where she had hoped to start anew, now felt foreign and intimidating. He helped her down, his hands steady. Her trunk was set down on the boardwalk, a line drawn between their shared journey and the path she must now walk alone. "I'll take the horses to the livery," he said. "You can ask about a room in that building there." Eleanor entered the boarding house. The woman at the front desk had silver hair in a tight bun and peered at her over a pair of spectacles. "You, Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, ma'am. Room upstairs, second door on the left." "Bring your own coal." The room was small and cold, with an iron bed, a wash basin, and a narrow window that looked out on snow-dusted rooftops. The silence here was different from the peace of Silas's cabin. It was a silence of emptiness. She sat on the edge of the bed, a feeling of profound loneliness washing over her. In the evening, a knock came at the door. Silas stood there, a canvas sack slung over his shoulder. "I thought you might need this," he said. "Nights in town can be just as cold." He set the sack of coal down near the small stove. "Thank you," she said, her voice little more than a whisper. "For everything." He only nodded. "You don't need to say it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of unsaid things, of feelings they both felt but could not yet name. "I stopped by the schoolhouse," he said after a moment. "The door was boarded up, Eleanor. There was no life in it at all. The chimney's been cold for a long time." Eleanor's world seemed to collapse. She walked slowly to her trunk and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was faded, the return address smudged. She hadn't noticed it before. "I don't know what I'll do now," she said, her voice breaking. "This was my final destination. There are no other maps to follow." He looked at her, not with pity, but with a deep and steady understanding. "You don't have to decide everything tonight." "It feels," she sighed, the words spilling out as if a dam had broken, as if my whole life has been nothing but deciding. Where to go, who to trust, when to leave. He looked down at his hands for a moment before he spoke. "The world has a way of disappointing, Eleanor. But that doesn't mean you should stop looking for the ones who won't." He paused, letting his words settle. "Whether you trust me, that is for you to decide for yourself." The room slowly warmed. She poured him a cup of tea, their fingers brushing as he took it. "I always thought I'd come out here and find something waiting," she said, sitting on the bed again. "A place to belong. A purpose." Silas sat opposite her, the chair creaking under his weight. "Perhaps you have, just not where you were looking." She looked out the window where the street lamps cast a warm orange glow on the snow. Then she turned back to him. "Tell me about your homestead." He looked at her, his eyes holding the same quiet certainty that had guided her through the storm. "If, when I leave tomorrow, you still wish to see it, I will wait for you." Eleanor woke before dawn. The air in the boarding house room was cold, but yesterday's despair had been replaced by a clear resolve. She dressed quickly, coiled her hair neatly, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The wagon ruts from the day before were frozen on the street. She walked toward the edge of town, toward the livery, with a firm purpose in every step. She found him in the loft, rolling his bedroll with practiced hands. The faint morning light filtered through the slats of the barn, illuminating the bare strength of his forearms. "You're up with the sun," he said, not looking up. "I didn't sleep much." He tied the roll securely, then finally met her gaze. "Have you made your choice?" "I have," she said. "I want to see your land." He only nodded, as if it were the only answer he had expected. "I'll saddle the horses." They rode out of town as the sun began to warm the peaks of the western hills. This time, she rode her own horse, parallel to him. The silence between them was comfortable, a companionship that didn't need words. As the last buildings of Sheridan disappeared behind them, she asked, "Have you always lived in this area?" His eyes stayed on the trail ahead. "I came up from Colorado. As a boy, my uncle took me in after my father passed. He ran cattle on the North Range. Do you ever go back?" "There's nothing there," he said, his voice even. "My mother didn't stay after the funeral." "I don't know where she went." He gave a slight shrug. "You learn to build your life around what doesn't leave." Eleanor swallowed, understanding that statement held a lifetime within it. They rode on, the trail winding through snow-dusted pines. When they reached his land, she felt it before he said a word. It possessed the same quiet steadiness as the man riding beside her. The cabin was nestled between two hills, a split-rail fence running along one side. "It looks like something that was built to last," she said softly. "I tried to build it that way," he replied. Inside, the cabin was as clean and sparse as she remembered. He hung up her coat and put water on to boil without needing to ask. She walked to the window, watching the light shift across the hills. "I didn't know land could feel like this," she said. "Like what?" "As if it's listening." He was quiet for a moment. "This land holds its peace. That's why I never left." After a simple meal of bread and stew, he placed a folded paper on the table. "I asked around in town. The man who posted the notice for a teacher. He died 2 months ago, a fall from his horse. So that chapter was officially closed. But there are children here," he continued. "Not many, but enough who would learn if someone taught them, right here in these hills. But what would I live on? Where would supplies come from?" "I can help with that," he said. "I trade cattle twice a year. I can set a portion aside." Her voice was quiet. "You would do that for me?" "I would do it because you are here." He met her eyes, and this time he hid nothing. "Because I want you to stay." She stood, the paper still in her hand. What would that mean, Mr. Cole?" He stood as well, facing her. His voice was not rushed, only filled with a plain, earthy honesty. "It means I would make room for you, Eleanor. Not out of debt or duty, but because I brought you through one storm, and you would willingly face a dozen more if it meant you were safe on the other side, with me." Eleanor stepped toward him. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of something waiting. "Steady and true. I didn't expect to find this." "Neither did I," he said. She reached for his hand, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and unshaking. For the first time since leaving Kansas, Eleanor felt a foundation settle deep within her, solid and sure. The next morning, frost drew delicate patterns on the window panes. Eleanor stood on the cabin's wooden floor, a wool blanket draped over her shoulders, watching the slow sunrise over the hills. The scent of pine ash from last night's fire lingered in the air. "That letter," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. "Do you think the families here would truly send their children, even without a proper schoolhouse?" "They'll need a reason to believe the journey is worthwhile," Silas replied, pouring water into a tin mug. "But they will come if they see someone is truly staying." Eleanor walked to the table and sat down. "Then I'll start with what I have. A roof and 4 walls are a luxury, not a necessity for learning. I've made do with far less." Silas set the mug down in front of her. "This time, the work will be shared." She traced the rim of the cup with her finger, then looked up. "And if someone asks what I am to you," he didn't hesitate, "they will know you as the one who chose to stay." Later that day, they saddled the horses and rode toward the ridge where a widow named Alma Burkhead kept 2 sons and a few milk cows. When they arrived, Alma stood with a pail in one hand, her eyes narrowed in scrutiny. "Heard you came in on a storm," she said. "I did, ma'am," Eleanor replied, "but I'm not leaving again." The older boys stepped out onto the porch. "We don't have books," Eleanor smiled. "Knowledge begins with curiosity. I have stories enough to make you curious until the thaw." Alma studied her a moment longer. "You aim to teach my boys if I let you?" She nodded once. "You'll need more then." "Stories, but I reckon it's a start." They rode on from there, stopping wherever a door would open or a face would lean over a fence. By sundown, 3 families had agreed to send their children if Eleanor could find a place to gather them. Back at the cabin, Silas handed her a piece of charcoal and a plank of wood. She sat cross-legged by the fire, sketching a rough plan, her brow furrowed in thought. "There's a clearing to the west," he said, his voice even. Flat and open, close enough for a morning's ride. We can build something there with what I have. Eleanor looked up. You'll help me build it? He knelt beside her. My hands will be there for the heavy work, but the school, that will be yours to raise. She nodded slowly. I will, that night. After the fire had died down, Eleanor stood just outside the door. The stars were out, bright and sharp in the cold sky. Silas joined her, his breath rising in quiet plumes. I never said thank you, she said. Not like this. She turned toward him. He didn't move, just waited. I had accepted that I would walk my path alone, she said. But then you appeared, never asking for anything, just staying. I didn't stay for nothing, he said, his voice low. I stayed because you awoke a part of this place, a part of me, that had been sleeping for a long time. Her hand found his. Not tentatively, not unsure, but steady. Then let us stay, she said. Here, together. He closed his fingers around hers, the grip warm and firm. We will. They stood like that for a long time, the snow quiet beneath their boots, the sky endless above them. Two people who had come through the hardest season and had at last found something that would not be taken by wind or distance. Something earned, something kept. By late March, the ground had thawed enough to take a post without splintering. Silas drove the last one into place with a final swing of the sledgehammer. Eleanor stood nearby, holding a length of twine, her hair braided neatly down her back. The frame of the new schoolhouse stood in the western clearing, its ribs catching the morning sun like the bones of something being born. Wall timbers are next, Silas said, stepping back to eye his work. I'll haul the rest from the cut pile tomorrow. I'll start on the benches, Eleanor said. If I carve one a day, I'll have enough before the roof is on. That night, they sat on the porch steps. Silas was cleaning his rifle with an oiled cloth, his hands steady even in the dimming light. Eleanor leaned against a post, her legs stretched out. Have you ever wondered who you might have been? She asked. If the world had given you more choices? He paused for only a moment. Perhaps still this, but I might have started sooner. You mean with the land? He turned the rifle barrel in his lap. No, I mean with you. The porch creaked as she shifted closer. You never asked what I wanted before. I figured you would tell me when you were ready. Her voice dropped. I want to stay here for good. Not just to teach, not just to rest. I want to build my life next to yours. He rested the rifle across his knees and turned fully to face her. Then build it. I'll put my hands to it with yours. The following weeks passed in a rhythm of purpose. The schoolhouse took shape, each board set with care. Alma's boys sometimes came to help, hauling stones for the hearth. Other children began to appear, brought by fathers or older sisters, their eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and hope. One evening, as spring thunder rolled gently on the horizon, Silas came into the cabin with a parcel wrapped in muslin. He laid it on the table and slowly unwrapped it. Inside sat a simple plain gold band. I traded the mare I didn't need, he said, and the last of the salted hides. Eleanor touched the ring with one finger, her voice soft. You didn't have to. I didn't want you to have what was easy. I wanted you to have what was chosen. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a light she made no effort to hide. Put it on me. He did, with both hands, as careful as if setting a precious thing in its place. When he leaned down to kiss her, it was not rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that people grow into over time, earned, deep, and quiet. The wedding was 3 days later, held beneath the half-finished rafters of the schoolhouse, with pine boughs pinned to the beams. Alma brought preserves, and someone from a distant ranch brought wild honey. The children picked wildflowers from the creek bed and gave them to Eleanor in a bundle tied with twine. Silas wore his cleanest shirt. Eleanor wore her best dress. They stood before the ridge and exchanged vows in plain words, not memorized but meant. When the sun sank low and the guests rode off one by one, Silas took her hand and led her home. The cabin door stood open, a fire already lit out years later. The schoolhouse still stood, weathered but strong. More families had settled nearby. The children grew, and some came back to visit, bringing little ones of their own. Eleanor taught until her hair was streaked with silver. Silas continued to tend the land. They never left, because they never wanted to, and every evening, when the light slanted just so through the cabin window, they would sit together in the hush between day and night, their hands folded together, their hearts full of the life they had built. A life with a foundation so deep that no storm could ever shake it again.